Hi, I'm Kate Brauning, and I write young adult thrillers with a twist. My first book out is How We Fall, which is a romantic suspense about three teenagers, Jackie and Marcus, who are cousins, and Ellie, who is their best friend. In the wake of Ellie's disappearance, Jackie and Marcus fall into a dangerous relationship that could destroy their families. I've also written The Ballad of Dinah Caldwell, which comes out November 2nd of this year, and this is the book I'll be reading a passage to you from today. The Ballad of Dinah Caldwell is about Dinah, a young woman who sets out to kill the man who took her family, with the help of Kara, her best friend and secret crush, and Johnny, a young bootlegger who lives in a cave. A quick content warning about this passage I'm going to read to you. There are some descriptions of death and loss in it. So the passage I'm reading today is from Chapter 3 of The Ballad of Dinah Caldwell, and just for a little bit of context, Dinah is 17 and she's walking home from the neighbor's house with her little brother Warren, who is 11. The afternoon had gotten oppressively humid and warm, even though the sky was overcast. She was so warm by the time they reached the bridge over the ravine that she was unzipping her jacket when Warren stopped walking. "Dinah, look." His tone made her head jerk up. That big silver truck sat in front of their house. Parked arrogantly sideways, the front tires off the driveway and into the grass. "Roll the bikes into the ditch. Stay here. Don't move." Dinah dropped her bike in the road. "I'm not staying." Warren dropped his bike too. "You have to. I'll come get you if it's okay." She paused long enough to make sure he wasn't following, and then she ran. Why would he be back again? The house was still a quarter-mile away, and she was coming up from behind it. She couldn't see anything but the reflection of the sun on the house windows and the gleaming silver of the truck. She gripped the hilt of the knife in her belt. She had Kara's money. If he was here to force her mother to sell the well, she could give him that. Promise the rest in a week. A few hundred yards left. Twice now she'd left her mother alone with that man. Her feet hit her yard, tore over the patchy grass. Dinah slammed into the back door and almost tripped on the steps. But it didn't open when she yanked on the doorknob. Locked. It was never locked. A scream stuck in her lungs. She ran around the side of the house to the front door, but her feet involuntarily slowed, and then they stopped on the driveway all by themselves. He stood on the porch. Gabriel Gates was leaning against the rail, smoking a cigarette. White skin tanned leathery, creases around his eyes from the sun. One boot crossed over the other, like he belonged there. The door stood open, but she couldn't see through the screen door from here. She waited for her mother to look out the window, but nothing. Dinah ran past him and into the house. Her mother lay on the braided rug in the living room. Her arm was bent at an impossible angle. Dinah's knees hit the rug. "Mom. Mom, are you okay? Can you hear me?" Everything in the house looked fine. Nothing was out of place. Nothing except the way her mother's head tilted, like something was wrong with her neck. Dinah thought she'd been helpless yesterday. That yesterday had been the punchline. She touched her mother's face. No response. She grabbed her hand, trying to feel a pulse. Anything to say this wasn't her whole world. Gone. Her mother's knuckles were scuffed. The skin on her hands creased from working in the garden, kneading dough, stitching up rips, chopping wood. Her hands looked a little like raisins, dried by the sun, but with everything good still inside them. The creak of the screen door had her turning around, pulling her knife out of the sheath. Gates stood just inside the doorway. "Your mother got very angry." His voice should have no power over her. She shouldn't freeze like he was her god, and what he said next would determine her whole life. She hit her head when she fell. Dinah touched her mother's face again. Her skin was cooling, but maybe that didn't mean anything. Her mother had to be alive. Dinah was just wrong, because her fingers were turning numb and she couldn't feel anything correctly. Her mother's eyes stared across the room. Maybe she'd blink. Dinah brushed the soft skin by her mother's eyelashes. Her eyelids felt stiff. Gates shrugged, his thin lips moving into a flat line. "She was very emotional. Tried to make me leave when I told her I'd be foreclosing. It was a terrible accident." Dinah's mind had left her body, gone somewhere safe, maybe just followed her mom to wherever she was now. Gates was talking through thick clouds. He sounded miles away from where she sat on the braided rug of her living room floor. She could feel the knife in her palm. She twisted the handle of her knife around and around in her hand. The blade flashed sunlight from the window. "Stand up," He's lying. Stand up. She didn't fall. His cigarette ashed onto the floor. Dinah stood up. Everyone is going to leave. All you're going to have is 3 empty counties of deserted forest. He flicked his cigarette into the sink. As long as people are desperate, there will be people who won't leave, and people who will come here to work for me. I'm creating jobs. Dinah flung her knife at him, but he was already moving toward her, and the blade buried itself in the doorframe where his chest had been. He grabbed her braid, tilted her head up until she met his bloodshot eyes. "You're right," she said. "We won't all leave." His other hand gripped her jaw, and she couldn't have spoken then even if she'd wanted to. Looking into his eyes made her feel like she was leaving her own body, rising out of his grip and out of the house until she could crush him inside it. Something creaked. Then the metallic pop-chink-thunk of a shell hitting the chamber. Warren stood in the doorway, looking down the sights of his rifle. His voice shook, but his hands were steady on the gun. "Get out of our house." Warren, no. Gates tightened his grip on her jaw, fingers pressing on her lips until they cut into her teeth. "You put that gun down, or I'll break your sister's neck right here." Warren's shoulders steadied, went still. Dinah saw it. He squeezed the trigger. The bang was so loud in the small house. Gates ducked, and the shot hit the wall to his right. Dinah twisted her head and sank her teeth into Gates' hand. He screamed and jerked back, but she kept digging her teeth in until they pierced flesh. He shoved her away. Her head snapped back. She bolted to her feet, reaching Warren in 3 steps. Together they moved away from the door over to the table. Blood had spurted into her mouth. His blood, his iron and salt. She spit onto the floor. Gates stepped towards Warren. "You really think you're going to kill me, kid?" Warren kept his aim steady. "I've killed all kinds of things. Get out." Gates went still. He watched them for a moment and tilted his head to the side. Then he walked out of the house and climbed into the truck. The bang of a truck door sounded, and a moment later the engine rumbled. The truck jerked as it turned onto the blacktop. Rubber screamed as the truck accelerated. Warren lowered his gun. His pale gray eyes strayed to their mother's body. Dinah had to do something. Even though her body was a husk, all her insides must have fallen out or blown away like smoke. She reached out and carefully took the gun from him. "We have to call a doctor," he said. Dinah shook her head. "They have an ambulance in St. George. They'll take her to the hospital." Dinah shook her head again. She wanted to scream, shake her mother's body, just to see it move. "I should have shot to kill him instead of threaten him. We could have taken her to the hospital in his truck." "Warren, listen, honey." Dinah crouched down and set the gun aside. "You need to get some stuff together, okay? Get all your warm clothes, the potatoes, the cheese, all the meat. Fill the water jug, too." His eyes finally met hers. "Why?" A wet streak burned down her face and she wiped it away. "He's coming back, okay? Did you see how fast he drove off? He's coming back for us, and he'll have his bodyguard and other people with him. We have to be gone by then. Hurry, Warren, go, okay?" She had to push him a little before he ran into his room. Dinah picked up the quilt from the couch and draped it over her mother's body. She should do more than that. How could a quilt be all she could give her mother? That was from Chapter 3 of The Ballad of Dinah Caldwell, which is out November 2nd of this year. You can pre-order it on my website, www.katebrauning.com. Thank you for listening.